process of understanding.
Yeah, but I like your question though.
Yeah.
I think we do kind of want to have a little bit of definition when we say operating philosophy and what that looks like. Okay, so if we had to break it down, there's 5 principles that are out there now, or 5 beliefs, or whatever we want to call it. I'm sure you could organize it in different ways, but they're right. Blame. Let's error is the first, right?
Yes, I didn't conclude my conversation.
Yeah,
So error.
Error.
Error is normal.
Yeah, it's just normal, right?
It's normal.
And so error is normal. Then the second one is blame fixes nothing, right?
It feels good.
It does feel good.
It feels
at the
good.
time, just at the moment.
Quite natural.
And there's a unique kind of production pressure that comes when there's been a mishap. You know, there's the production pressure that we all work under no matter what we do. But then something goes wrong and it starts a whole other clock ticking. We have to report up, we have to report out. We want answers, and as quicker and more efficient we can get those answers out, the quicker they move on to something else and the pain goes away. And we do that over and over again at the expense of actually learning about what's going on in systems, and we just put ourselves in the position to do some version of the same mishap again.
Because we're trying to conserve energy, right? So that's one of the things that is one of the big barriers. We have to actually really believe in this this philosophy in order to put the value in and the energy into doing things differently.
Right.
Because it's much easier to say, oh well, it's just that person's fault, so I don't have to do anything about it. That takes zero of thought, zero energy, zero just say, yeah, we're done.
Right.
So that's why it's important to think of it as a culture change, or establishing a new social norm, right, as to how we deal with things.
And that's probably one of the most difficult ones to grapple with as well, because there is an enormous societal expectation that blame or accountability, which is another way of putting it, there must be accountability when something bad has happened. Okay, who's gonna front up and take accountability for this? Who's gonna own it? Yeah. So what I found was absolutely fascinating with this whole thing that's happening in Thailand in this cave. The teacher and all these boys have gone into the cave. It shows a difference in that culture in Thailand. How there hasn't been any discussion in Thailand about blaming the teacher for taking these kids into the cave. All they were saying was, "Oh, we hope he comes out safely." So it's immediately more about restoration rather than, okay, what's the consequences if he gets out alive? What are the consequences going to be once he gets out? And that's it showed a greater degree of maturity in that culture, that they're not interested in appropriating blame.
The good news is that just very recently in the news, we have heard a few things pop up where people are starting to push against the idea of blame. So it's just a couple news articles recently where the person interviewing would push back and say, not sure really that there's any benefit in us requiring some sort of accountability for this, because no one intended for this to happen. And it's just within this past 6 months, I think, that I personally have started to hear that on the news, which to me is very exciting, right?
Yeah,
because that
people are interested about a deeper story.
They are, yeah. And
but I think one of the big things that inhibits people to kind of take a bit of a plunge with this way of thinking is that they somehow have been convinced in some cases that they're giving up their ability to use enforcement or punishment or accountability, for lack of a better word. And I don't think that's true. You're the boss. You always have that at your disposal. You can decide who does and doesn't work there and under which conditions. And so if you look deeply enough, what I think you'll find is if presently you find the preponderance of your incidents require that you find a person and blame them, and you keep on doing this over and over and over again, I think anybody can honestly say there's probably more to learn here. Now, when you make that inquiry and ask different questions and find information, you may find that this was a bad actor. I have a human resources problem. I've been bringing sociopaths and arsonists into my workplace, and I need to fix that. But for the most part, where we find people who are actually struggling to get things done in a context that they exist in, making calculations that to them at the time seem like just the right thing to do. And if we just remove those people from the system, all we're doing is putting more people into the system to put them in a position to be firing. It feels good to get rid of that problem. But what people have to understand is you're not giving up your power to punish if you need to punish, if that's the correct answer.
It's and, not or.
Not or,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And really on the surface, a lot of the time, something that seems sort of like a flagrant act, like with just a tiny bit of information. Oh, this was, the terminology we throw around sometimes in companies is a flagrant violation, right? Once you understand the context, exactly.
So once flamboyant.
once you understand the context, because we know I say the third principle, right? Context drives behavior. Once you understand the context, then you start to think, I think with the same information, same environment, I'm pretty sure I would have made a very, very similar decision. So things that on the surface seem as though that response is the right one, the removing somebody from your system, whatever we want to call it, discipline, accountability. It might seem like the right response immediately, but as soon as you get to that deeper story, you say, no, if we put anyone else in this similar position, the probability is really high that somebody else is going to make a very, very similar call in that situation. So.
And the interesting thing is that when you're going back to kind of how this evolves, in the village, it was kind of really important that when you were meant to be staying awake at night to let the rest of the village know that there was going to be attackers or something like that, when you failed, it was kind of really important that they actually focused on that failure and understood that failure, right? Because that's kind of life and death. And so I think that in those kind of situations, that's when you get run out into the desert. You know, that's kind of how we worked in that kind of culture. That was a survival mechanism. And yet, almost always in our current day society, the kind of retribution that occurs, even within our legal system, which is by design retributive, it doesn't actually drive the same kind of behaviour that results in that village growing and learning and evolving and getting smarter and genetically improving over time. So it just doesn't work.
And I think that's certainly what I've seen, or we've seen in organisations we've worked with, is that they have gone in with great intentions to introduce sort of like restorative justice approaches, and then had issues in actually applying them. And some of that comes back to the way that it's framed. If you want to introduce these ideas of not blaming and so forth, of restorative justice, then what's really important is the outcome. What is it you're trying to achieve by this? So if you frame it as we want to become a learning organisation, what is a barrier to learning? Well, the way that we respond to error and failure are hugely important. But if you just introduce a program of restorative justice, then you're kind of missing the point, because there's no outcome that you're trying to achieve necessarily. Which I think leads on to, are we on the third one now?
Well, so I think you actually touched on the fourth and the fifth together, sort of, right? But it's perfect.
Everyone's thumbs up.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, so error is normal, right? Blame fixes nothing.
Yep.
Right?
Systems and context drive behaviour.
Absolutely.
Can I on that one though? You mentioned systems there, Mark. Often in safety, what we would kind of default to in that language is like management systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are you talking about when you say system?
So, so I'll give you an example. So if I work in an operation where our job is to go out and rescue people by helicopter each day, and it's hazardous work, and there's not a whole heck of a lot of margin if things go poorly. That's why we try to put as much protection around all the things that we do. And then separate from that is the safety program of the organization, which changes every few years, because no one safety program is perfect and it never works. And so, as I said, I've been through every flavor of the day. So it might be something like, my crew might be there, after a really rough day, like recovering the body of a child who fell into the canyon or something. Horrible, horrible day. And we would be there like attending to that, waiting for the coroner. And then the safety office would show up because it was extension cord inspection day. And so you have these situations where the people are actually out there creating safety and doing things well and safe and adding value, are being subjected to a safety program that has very little to do with what they do. On the flip side, where it's more unified, you see not people who are coming out there to try to catch you doing things wrong. Like, yes, your extension cords are good, but you haven't inspected your fire extinguisher for the past 9 days, because everybody knows that fire extinguishers go defunct after about 10 days, right? So you're probably going to want to edit out some of this. Dead children and things like that, quite enough content. But the difference between people who actually create safety and don't think about it while they're doing it, they just know that getting home at the end of the day safely and in one piece and producing the work that they're supposed to work, making their bosses and their families proud, is the job. And the more the safety program itself nurtures and enhances that, the better that safety program is. And so when a safety program is seen as separate to the actual work getting done, then you get in these places where safety decides what's going to be measured, safety decides what's going to be appreciated, and then goes out there to check the world to make sure it's being done. And then what you've done there is you've placed a huge disincentive. You're like, oh my gosh, here they come with a clipboard again. So stop what you're doing, because we don't want to show them anything, because it's just going to give them another opportunity to come in and criticize us. And that's done that way in many places. When you get away from that, and it's more of a cooperative thing, like these people who maybe are coming here to look at us don't necessarily do the work that we do, but their interest is in learning about the work that we do so that we can all do it safer and better for the organization.